Hey there everyone! In today's video, you are going to witness the most evil business in the world. The dark side of startup culture, a Theranos story. Elizabeth Holmes, a young woman at 19, dropped out of Stanford University to start her own business, Theranos, which claimed to revolutionize healthcare and change the world. The company became worth around $9 billion and was featured in magazines as the next Steve Jobs. However, the company was all a lie. Holmes had a phobia of needles and a vision where she could prick a finger with a single drop of blood test for hundreds of different diseases. Elizabeth was able to raise some initial money to get the company up and running, but the company's progress was slower than expected. She demanded that research start happening 24/7, which led to overworked employees working through the night. She hired a second team and pitted them against each other, with the team that made the least progress being fired by 2006. The engineers had created a prototype machine called the Edison, which would make blood tests much faster, cheaper, and easier from a portable device you could use in the comfort of your own home. However, the machine rarely worked and had an extremely high error rate. It was clear to everyone working on the machine that it needed a lot more work before it was ready. By 2006, Theranos had burnt through its initial funding and needed more money fast. Holmes began sweet-talking more investors, bragging about the revolutionary new machine they'd created and claiming that it worked perfectly. When investors asked to see the machine in action, she created an elaborate deception so they didn't realize how faulty the machine was. The investors assumed the machine had worked perfectly, but the test hadn't even been done using the machine. Many of the investors were rich older men who seemed especially taken in by Holmes. The company's financial officer found out about this and told Holmes they had to stop doing fake demonstrations because it was misleading investors to think the machine worked much better than it really did. Holmes also asked him to significantly increase the revenue predictions to make the company's finances look much better than they really were. When the financial officer confronted Holmes about this, she turned ice cold and told him to leave right now. To make things even worse, Holmes never hired another CFO to replace him, meaning there was nobody to question the absurd revenue predictions she was given to investors. Theranos raised yet more millions of dollars in funding. However, the chief financial officer was just one of many in a long line of employees to get fired from the company. When Holmes decided to start a trial of the Edison machine on a group of terminal cancer patients, several employees came to her to tell her she shouldn't be doing this since the machine was constantly breaking and giving wildly inaccurate results. They said it wasn't fair to use real patients as guinea pigs, but she continued with the trial anyway. Elizabeth faced high staff turnover and were surrounded by blind loyalty to her or people too afraid to speak up. The company hired workers from overseas who had working visas and wouldn't leave the country if they got fired. Therefore, as you witness Elizabeth Holmes' story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of shady business ventures and the importance of honesty and transparency in business operations. From promise to peril, the rise and fall of Theranos. Elizabeth, the founder of Fairness, was a woman who had been dating Sonny since she was just 18 years old. Sonny was described by employees as a tyrant, brutally aggressive, and intimidating, tracking everything they did, including their browsing history and installing a key logger on their computers. This was part of the company's insanely secretive culture, where employees had to sign non-disclosure agreements when they joined and were accompanied by security guards at all times. Theranos constantly claimed that this secrecy was simply to protect trade secrets, but in reality, it was to cover up all the lies about the state of their technology and the way the company was being run. When anyone was fired or if they quit, they were forced to sign another non-disclosure agreement confirming they wouldn't talk about anything at all that had happened while Theranos. They couldn't even speak to any of their colleagues on their way out. Elizabeth constantly reminded employees how impactful their technology would be in making tests more accessible to everyone, helping detect a variety of diseases including cancer, and thus saving lives. There was a strong driving mission that Elizabeth had them all convinced they were going to change the world. In 2013, Fairness announced a partnership with Walgreens and Safeway, where they would start offering Theranos blood tests in their stores for the first time the general public was going to be able to use the company's machines. Elizabeth seemed to expect the machines would be fully working by the time they launched in stores, but they weren't. They were still breaking and producing inaccurate results. Walgreens and Safeway put up a lot of money for this deal, much of which Theranos had already spent. By rolling out their machines in stores, Elizabeth helped raise around $400 million more from investors who were now even more convinced that everything with the company seemed to be going great. Many of these investors were high-profile names like Rupert Murdoch and the Walton family, giving Theranos even more credibility. The idea with this deal with Walgreens and Safeway was to set up Theranos booths in their stores, where people could get a blood test done with just a brick of their finger and essentially choose from a menu of which things they wanted to test for. However, because the machines didn't actually work properly yet, Elizabeth kept trying to stall for time. After almost 2 years of delays, eventually, Elizabeth had to make a decision. Admit the technology didn't work and lose the deal with Walgreens and Safeway, which would mean refunding many millions of dollars or just putting the faulty machines in stores and hoping it somehow works out. This was a turning point. Up until now, Elizabeth had deceived investors by letting the general public use the faulty fairness machines. The cost of deception in health technology. Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos, was accused of putting lives at risk by providing incorrect results on blood tests. Walgreens and Safeway began offering Theranos blood tests in their stores, but the machines were not working properly. To avoid regulatory issues, they collected blood in-store and sent it to a nearby lab instead of in-store. This loophole allowed them to bypass the same regulatory checks. Theranos' biggest selling point was that it only required a small drop of blood from a finger prick. However, when people arrived to get their blood tested, they often had their blood taken with a syringe, and the results took weeks instead of just a few hours. The test was advertised as a revolutionary experience, but it was actually taking normal blood samples and using third-party machines from other companies. Over half of the tests they promised were not theoretically possible, and most of the tests they could test for didn't work very well. Theranos was performing tests on third-party machines and pretending they were their own results. Due to Elizabeth's insistence on using a small amount of blood, they had to dilute the blood samples to run them on commercial testing machines, reducing the accuracy of the results. Laboratory notes set up near the stores were hastily put together, and many of the staff were inexperienced. More experienced staff members often quit or got fired for criticizing the way things were done. One of the biggest problems was that FedEx was used to send blood samples from stores to the lab, causing parcels to overheat and clot the blood. Elizabeth Holmes was able to keep up the pretense that everything was going fine, with plans to roll out Theranos in stores in Arizona and the entire world. However, while she was securing funding from investors and gaining publicity, she was also gaining fame and fame. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe our channel and leave a comment in the comment section below.